I'm Teneale.
And I'm Kelsey, and we're financial advisors from 𝐴𝑙𝑚𝑎𝑛 Partners True Wealth, bringing you thought-provoking conversations around you, your money and your life on the Wealth Experience podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining us again on Wealth Experience, your listening hub for all that you need to know to simplify the complex world of finance. I'm Teneale, and my co-host Kelsey and I want to deliver you with everything you need to know today about buying or selling property and how to beat the market.
So today's segment, we delve into how to work efficiently as a team with your real estate agent and how to equip yourself to get the best price, timing or terms on a property transaction. And I'm quite excited by this one, Teneale, because I remember when we bought our first home and I had no idea.
I still have no idea, and we've just bought our second home, Kels.
Yeah, lots of questions around, what can we do? How do we push back? What's the agent supposed to be doing for us? How do you actually work with the agent to get what you want, because everybody's got all these different conflicts of interests, I guess.
Yeah,
so I'm really looking forward to conversations today.
Oh, great. Well, we're definitely not experts in this space. We're learners, but we're just going to share with you the bits and pieces that we've picked up along the way and what we talk a little bit with our clients about when they have questions in this way. So
that's right.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about when you're working with a real estate agent, what are they actually chasing from a buyer? Ideally, the real estate agent's job is to get the transaction to happen, right? So they're hoping that they can get somebody that is emotionally invested in the process. So if I've got a buyer that walks in and just absolutely loves a house and sees himself in it straight away, that emotional connection is going to make it a lot easier for a transaction to go ahead, right?
So if you have someone walk in and they see the house and they cry, like I did with the first house.
I hope they're crying because they love it and not because they hate it. So, that's the one thing there is how would you as a buyer make sure that you don't become too emotionally invested in the process and keep it as a transaction. Secondly, real estate agents would also like the I need it now buyer. Sometimes this can be because the real estate agent might have another buyer that wants to come through the property straight away, and it's creating some sense of urgency. So having somebody that needs the transaction to happen straight away is going to be more beneficial than what it is to have somebody that, has all of the space and time to do it at their leisure.
It's really hard when you're going through that process of if it's your home that you're going to live in. It's really hard to not be emotionally invested or, I need it now and I want to get in and make sure we've got this one and lock it in. So to know, how can you make sure that you're not this type of buyer and that you are getting the best terms and thinking logically?
Yeah. It's like with anything, right? So we talk a lot about plans, and really you need your plan before you're going to purchase a house or even before you're going to sell a house. We're talking a little bit here predominantly about buying at the moment. So, first of all, we need to make sure we've got our finance lined up so that you have one less item on the to-do list if you are successful in your offer. That can create a sense of urgency if you're concerned about your finance not being ready to go as well. So
how far in advance do you think someone should do that?
That's a good question. I used to think that you should have it a long way in advance. I have it a couple, if I'm going to be looking in the next couple of months, maybe I need to get this in place now. Having a chat with your mortgage broker is going to become important, because there can be a difference too between the type of financing that you can be approved for, which we will talk to a little bit later in this segment as well. But your mortgage broker is going to be your source of truth here. They might say, yep, if you're looking for a house, we'll go and get you a bit of pre-approval ready, and they'll tell you the timeframes on that. When it comes to the bigger view of that, though, when you're looking at how much can I actually afford and my cash flow management, that's what you want to be doing well ahead of time. Yep. Because it's one thing to get an approval and say, yes, we can borrow $500,000, but if you do that and you haven't done your cash flow analysis on whether you can actually afford it, and then you've gone and put an offer on a property, that's going to put you in a huge amount of pressure to go back then and do those numbers and go, oh no, this is not going to work out for us. So
yeah, because oftentimes the bank will say they'll lend you probably a little bit more than what would actually in reality be comfortable in your personal circumstances on your cash flow, and take into other considerations. If it's important for you guys to have holidays each year, but you're maxing out on your mortgage and it's just taken away from that, those are probably the other things to think about.
Definitely.
Maybe you can afford it, but what does it take away from? So what's that comfortable range?
Definitely,
so,
right.
Yeah,
Like absolutely. So what else can I be doing as a buyer during this process? Well, being pragmatic as possible, and understanding that at the end of the day, it is a transaction. So like we're talking about, the emotion that comes with such a big financial decision can start to sort of cloud our judgment a little bit here, and tell us that we either want it and we want it straight away and we want it at any cost. But if we do know that there's parts of this process that they're not sexy, it's not fun to be going and sitting with a solicitor and going through a contract and have those pressures. But if we understand that it is a transaction and that we've got this ahead of us, it allows us to kind of compartmentalize that a little bit and know that I need to be logical and I need to read through everything correctly, and try and disassociate that emotional tie that we've got to it. Now, having specialists in your corner during that process is really important. I would also say that, just giving it time, knowing that if you don't need to take part in something like an auction, and you've got the time to make an offer on your own terms, just wait it out a little bit, if there's the ability to do so. Sometimes we're not afforded that privilege because there's a lot of buyers wanting a property, but wherever you can, and I know, Kelsey, you've spoken about this sort of sleep overnight on it, or sleep on it for a day or two, to be able to give yourself that time to think it through. It's a big transaction, so wherever you can, do give it that time.
Yeah. That's right. And that goes with most purchases, right? You should always be thinking about that. But it is hard because, especially in the big cities in Australia, for instance, some people can't get a property unless they're going to these auctions because there's just too many buyers.
Absolutely.
So I guess in those cases, you've got to really bring it back to how much do I really need to be buying a house right now if this is the market condition? Is there another alternative, perhaps?
Yeah.
So you don't get sucked into the vortex of perhaps paying too much. So you've really got to remain rational. Definitely.
And we talk a lot about that triangle, right? So if I can't give it time, there's these 3 points that we kind of look at, and I either can get it at when I need it or for the amount that I need are probably two of the biggest ones, or on the terms that I want, right? So if I don't have time on my side, I need to be very careful that if budget is my particular constraint as well, I can't just go all in. If I've set a hard number there, I can't go past that number.
Yeah, that's really important, knowing what that limit is and sticking to that.
Definitely.
Regardless.
Yeah. Because you can get sucked into it, right? You can get caught
$5
up.
grand more? Oh, that's okay. Oh, no, another $5 grand? Okay. You've really got to be careful. But to know, what are some of the things that the real estate agents do that they're really good at to do what they need to do to get the sale happening?
Yeah. So real estate agents are obviously a very necessary part of this process. They bring the buyer and the seller together. They understand the ins and outs of the transactions and how it all works. Part of their job, though, is to make sure they're creating some good hype around the property. And they do that in a lot of different ways, obviously, with their marketing and whatnot. But even things like just having a short window for open homes. So, you might see an open home only has a 30-minute window there. Obviously, that makes sense so that the agent can go to multiple open homes in the day because they're very busy themselves. But also it creates that additional hype, because if I've got a lot of people going through the property all at one point in time, the property is going to look more attractive. So if we know that as buyers, and we know that there might be a lot of people going through this property, it doesn't mean that every person that goes through is going to want to buy the property. And there might not be all these contenders, I suppose, that I have to be up against for the property.
It's interesting, though, because when they do it in that way, it does create that sense of urgency for the buyer, and they might not even be there.
That's
it just
right.
seems that way because of the pressure of how many people are there and coming through the doors because it's such a short window.
That's right, yeah.
So.
And even the thing of, if I turn up early everywhere, right? It's just the way that I'm hardwired. So if an open house is going to be at 10 o'clock, I'll be there at quarter to 10.
Spying from the car.
Yeah, kind of sitting away and going, is it awkward if I pull up out front now? But you might notice that the agent doesn't have the house open. You're not ready to go in until the open time comes up. And again, that also creates that shortened window and means that people are coming through at the same point in time. And you're kind of sitting there and going, how many different people are going to turn? Oh, there's one car, there's two cars, and you're doing the count. So if you understand that is that can be one of the ways of sort of hyping the property up.
Yeah. So detaching from that then,
getting the level head.
This isn't actually necessarily the truth of how many people want this property right now.
Yeah, and they might all want the property, but if we in our heads go, you're exactly right. Yeah, I don't need to create it more than what it is at the moment. Yeah. And these definitely make that house seem a lot more desirable. So,
so what else can people do? Teneale, too, because we're talking about how do you not become one of those buyers? Is there any perhaps research that people can do ahead of time before jumping into the process?
Yeah, for sure. The real estate agent is looking for an indication of where the market's at. So they don't set the price of the property, right? That means that you can be afforded the ability to go out there and understand what's happening a little bit more in the marketplace. And, there's so much information that's available now. We know that there's, realestate.com apps and those kinds of things that are going to give me some market information. Obviously knowing that this is comparing against other similar properties in the market, and they don't have all the data and all the statistics, and they don't know if there's been renovations to the property that's happened that might have increased value, all those different bits and pieces. So at least understanding a bit of the market data there.
Can you get your mortgage broker, so if you are using a broker that is, could you get your mortgage broker to give you an indication of whether they think that's a fair price for a house too? Do they have some data that they look at and go, yeah, we think that's...
Yeah, the mortgage brokers will often, it's a great point, because they'll often have their own materials online and through the apps and everything that they're using, which provide a little bit more in-depth market information. So typically they would be able to give you some sort of an indication of where it might sit. And this is just so that you roughly know if you're in the right ballpark, right? Because sometimes they don't have dollar amounts listed online as to what the property's worth too. So, and it's really just knowing what might have happened with property prices in the last few years, and comparing against those different things as well too, because, sometimes a little bit of information can be dangerous. I know that this property was purchased for XYZ however many years ago, and I can make an assumption of what it is now, but have the markets risen sharply in the last few years? Have they dropped dramatically in the last few years? All of that information will make it easier to determine whether the pricing for the property seems like it's going to fit within your budget.
And even perhaps asking the real estate agent, it was valued at XYZ how many years ago, and now it's valued at this much. What have the owners done to improve that property over time?
Definitely.
Little things that may not be obvious to the eye that was okay, they had the roof replaced. Oh, great, I don't have to worry about that for X amount of years. Those sorts of things to understand why might that price have gone up.
Definitely, yeah. I definitely think curiosity is always going to be your friend in this, asking all those questions up front, and your real estate agent, they're going to have that kind of information, or if they don't, they can get that from the sellers for you. So just, another thing is then making sure that you're putting dollar figures. So if I'm buying a property now, putting some dollar figures on what you may be sacrificing as well. So, I've set myself the budget. Let's take that $500,000 again. And for my $500,000, I want a 3-bedroom house with a bathroom and, whatever else. But if you walk in and you've got a kitchen that's older than you wanted it to be, or you've got some gardening, landscaping that needs to be done, or just bits and pieces that you weren't anticipating, list down what you might actually think those are worth. Get some information from some builders or whatnot about how much you might spend on that, so that you can understand, what I actually have to put into property afterwards. That comes under your total cost of moving in. Same with even just furnishings, right?
Yeah, and the reality check of how long is it going to take for us to actually do that? Because sometimes you go, we're getting a good price for it. We'll just redo the kitchen or redo the bathroom, and then you move in, and 5 years later you still got the same old kitchen, the same old bathroom because you haven't done anything about it. So, and then you didn't really get what you wanted. So
Absolutely.
I think just knowing how quickly you're prepared to make that happen.
Yeah. And can you make that happen?
That's right.
My husband and Todd and I had a good conversation before we did this house purchase that we're undergoing, that we were going to renovate. We had a good conversation around it and came to realise that we're not the kind of people. One, we don't have the time that we could do it ourselves. And so secondly, if we're going to pay for somebody else to do it, I just don't think that we have the patience to do that as well. And that's just being realistic.
Yeah.
So if I haven't ever renovated before, or if I don't think that I can, be realistic about that as well and go, well, if I can't do that, I might have to just pay that additional amount into the property that I actually want to purchase.
And be on the same page as your partner, right? Because you can tell I'm speaking from somewhere. Because, one of you might go, we'll renovate, I'll do a lot of this myself, just don't worry about it, my partner. And then, in my head I'm going, we're never getting to that. You'll start it and it's going to drag on for years. So really having a clear picture of combined, what are you both willing to accept and talk that through.
Yeah. But Ben's been doing some great renovations actually, hasn't he?
The bathroom has gone back to the bare bones, and it's really starting to come together now. So, I take it back. He is making it happen.
No, he is. Well, that'll be exciting once it's all finished and looking shiny and new. And
So, Teneale, just like any financial decision, you might not get 100% what you want, and you'd refer to this as the triangle, so we call it the golden triangle. Just to recap, you might be able to get only 2 out of the 3 things, so paying the right amount in the right time frame that you need it, but maybe not the terms that you wanted, or vice versa. That could work in different ways. But I think it's really important to go, well, which one of these are you actually willing to sacrifice? So, for instance, if you can't move on price or time frame, and that's really important to you, understand what terms that the other party do actually want. That's probably your key question if it's hitting all of the other marks. And if they need a long settlement, and if they want inclusions in that transaction too, then you might be able to use that to your advantage, because it's one of those things that you're willing to be, a little bit flexible on.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely makes sense, because like you're saying, if I can't give on time and I can't give on price, but I can give a little bit on those terms and the flexibility around it, it makes you a bit more attractive than the next person that walks in and just goes, nope, I don't want any of that. I want it today.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when we're talking a little bit about, pricing then, we, from a valuations perspective, we do get a lot of people that ask, do you think that this is fair value for the house? And that's probably one of the questions that you are wanting to ask to your agent. But the reality is that the fair value is whatever the buyer and the seller are willing to settle at. So the real estate agent, again, they don't set that price. They're just getting to a position of going, you want to buy for X and you want to sell for Y, and we can meet somewhere that works for both parties. So there is a bit of a difference then between valuations from a perspective of what is a market valuation and then what's a bank valuation. So, Kelsey, do you want to talk through what a bank valuation actually does?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a really interesting point that you make, because as with most things, something's only worth as what someone's willing to pay for it. So talking about the bank valuation, they will actually undertake their own valuation when you purchase the property, and they'll do this before they offer you a loan. And they will only lend you up to a certain percentage of that value of the property, so what value they come up with. And the bank wants to make sure that they're protected, and that's the reason that they do this, because, if you're in a position where you might default, they want to make sure that they've got a certain percentage of that covered. So if their valuation comes in lower than what maybe you're purchasing for it, or what the market value is, the reason that they're doing that is for their own protection. So don't be surprised if you do see that happen, and don't be disheartened. Usually that does come in slightly lower, so that you effectively pay a little bit more to cover their losses should that ever happen in the future.
Yeah, so with and like you say, with a market valuation, then that's just purely the price that the agent or the valuer believes that the property would be worth on the wider market. So what someone would come in and pay for that property right now. So like you say, definitely bank valuations typically come in lower than market valuations. They can also be taking into consideration other costs, right? So they can consider if the bank had to sell your property tomorrow, they might have to pay commissions and real estate agent fees, marketing, advertising fees, legal, conveyancing costs, all those other expenses. So the bank valuation will certainly be, like I say, lower, typically lower because of those reasons.
That's right. And what I didn't realise until I purchased property is that when the banks are doing their valuation, they do want the details around the building and pest. You know, they really do delve into all of those details. So they're not just looking at, broad brush, what do we think this is valued at? They're really understanding what's happening within that property too.
Yeah, definitely the case. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk contract terms. So again, a real estate's job is to complete a successful transaction between the buyer and the seller with the least amount of friction as possible, because it makes everybody's life much easier. And this can be very daunting. And as the buyer, you may feel the time pressure of making a quick decision, as we've mentioned. And this may be the biggest financial decision that you ever make. It probably will be. So one thing that's important is not succumbing to the pressure of removing your terms. So the terms of a contract might include something like being subject to council reports being produced, or inclusions or exclusions of the sale. They might want the washing machine or the wine fridge. Building and pest is a common one. That's usually always a condition. And finance as well. So as the buyer, your terms can also be your protection. So if something comes up that you're not aware of on first glance, so you do a building and pest inspection, for instance, and we live in Queensland, so termite damage. You probably don't want to purchase a house that's got extensive termite damage. That would be a big red flag. So building those sorts of things into the contract, you're less likely to take on issues with the property that you didn't bargain for. So, terms can be a good thing.
All right, so then the next area that we've spoken a little bit about is around that process now. So if you're not a specialist in the area of buying and selling property and you don't have a lot of experience in that space, keeping on top of everything, including those important dates and making sure they're not passing by, is really crucial. So just start out again by speaking with your mortgage broker or your banker before you make an offer. A good broker is going to take you through all of the steps of the purchase so that you know what to expect and when. And then secondly, also selecting a conveyancing solicitor before you make an offer can be really helpful too. So know when they'll be available to you. When you find that property, how do they actually operate? Can you expect them to check your contract for all the important items that you want covered before you actually sign it? And this is one that I can't stress enough. Before you put your signature on the dotted line, make sure that you take that to a solicitor, to a conveyancer, and have them check it for all of the different facts and terms that you actually wanted in there. And ask your conveyancer, will they email you on each step of the process so that you know where it's up to and what the next important date is, or is that something that you have to look after? So just being on top of that and outsourcing to your specialist what you can is really important.
Another one that was new to me, Teneale, when I purchased the house, and I think you actually did mention it to me, was around getting insurance. So as soon as you're under contract, get insurance.
Yes.
Because you are partially liable for anything that happens to the property during that time frame, right?
Yeah, that's right. So from the date that you enter into the contract, you need to have your insurance in place. So not from the date that you take possession, but from the date that you enter the contract. And I guess it's one of those ones where the insurers are can get a little bit of a double bite of the pie, because you would expect that the other party still holds their insurance until the date that they've left, but you can't control that. And again, we come back to the sphere of control. If I can't control whether this seller has the insurance until the date that I take it over, I need to have the insurance in place now, because again, we're in Queensland. So what if a cyclone comes through the day before I'm ready to settle?
Yep.
And that massive event happens, I might be the one that's liable for it.
Yeah, exactly right. So let's talk now pre-approval and pre-qualification. So this one's a really interesting one, and if you do want to know more and delve a little bit deeper, have a listen to episode 16 with Karen Hall from Action Finance when we spoke about lending on first home buyers. But for the seller, having someone that is pre-approved for finance can be quite attractive. So a cash buyer is, probably the most ideal circumstances, but in many cases, this is just not what's possible. But a trap might be in understanding from the agent whether the potential buyer is pre-approved or just pre-qualified is really important, and pay attention to the terms that are being used, because it can be really easy to kind of hear pre and then think, okay, yep, they're pre-approved, they're good to go. But pre-approval and pre-qualified, two different things. So pre-qualification is the preliminary assessment of your creditworthiness based on the information that you provide to the lender. It gives you that estimate of how much you can borrow, what interest rate you might be offered. But the pre-approval, on the other hand, is where you've had a more thorough process that involves the lender verifying your financial information and your credit score. It then provides a conditional commitment to the loan for you, so that you effectively are able to get that mortgage or loan subject to certain conditions at the time. So it's definitely a lot stronger if someone is pre-approved, not pre-qualified, because if you're pre-qualified, doesn't mean that you're actually going to get approved for that loan.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. And that's, to the point that you made earlier of when you should go through that process. Your mortgage broker is going to explain to you how long a pre-approval or a pre-qualification will last for, because they might have different time frames on them as to how long the bank says, yes, you're pre-qualified in this way versus here's a full pre-approval.
Yeah, that's right.
So just then speaking a little bit now about other factors that you might need to take into account. So things like government schemes and the impacts of those, I think they're a really important one to understand too. Karen did speak about this as well. But again, now for the buyer, and there's been a lot in this episode for the buyer. Typically, there's quite a lot to think about in this space, but it does affect for the seller as well. So just if I'm buying, it would be good for me to understand if there are different government schemes that are available to us, because this can actually affect what my price limit is. So for example, if you can get some government support for a first home buyer scheme or something along those lines, but you can only pay up to $600,000 for the property, you need to know that you're looking for houses in the right bracket to start off with. And sometimes, the online sites and apps, they don't give you that good understanding of what the seller actually wants as a price. So maybe we can talk a little bit about some tips to get an idea on the property pricing, Kels?
Yeah, so first thing would be call the agent and ask them what the price range is that the seller's looking for. They won't always tell you, so just be mindful of that. So if the response is that the seller is waiting to see what the market sets the price at, that's often what they do. So they get a collective information around what people are willing to offer. Then share what your upper limit is with that agent and ask them if that puts you around the right price point, to get a bit of an indication if they're not going to outright tell you what that is.
Yeah, so you can ask that question, surely, right? If I've made the phone call and we don't know, we're just waiting for the pricing on the market, but I can still say, well, my price limit is 600,000. Am I even in the right ballpark? And if it's well off, they're not going to want me to come along to the open home, surely. That's if right. I don't have the money.
That's right. So if you're way off, you'll know. They'll more than likely tell you for sure. The other one is to ask your mortgage broker if they have any rough information on potential pricing. As we'd mentioned, they do have some background data that they can access. The caveat to this is that information is based on very generic information available online, and therefore it might not be a fair market valuation. The internet, doesn't really know about the home upgrades that have happened in that time. All these things that we've already spoke about. So that's probably the two things that you can do. And what about a seller, Teneale?
Yeah. So again, now if we're talking with those government schemes, knowing that might impact the price point for my property is important as well too. So if my property does attract first home buyers or somebody that's eligible for one of the government schemes, it might be an indication of how much price I'm going to get and what that capping might be. So just ask your agent what kinds of buyers have been pre-vetted, and what kind of buyers would be ideal for this property, because they'll probably give you an understanding of, is this a first home buyer? Is this a buyer that's eligible for some sort of government scheme? Is this a high level cash buyer, and an older couple that will be looking at this, a family home? So just speaking with your agent and understanding how you can get the best terms, and seeing that if I do have a price cap, I might need to look at those terms and see what's available to me to make sure that I'm finding the right person for the property.
Yeah. So speaking of pricing, when we're thinking about advertising the price of a property, I think nowadays we see a lot of expression of interest.
Yes.
There's not much actual dollar values on there sometimes.
Offers by negotiation.
Yeah. So for the seller, your agent is likely to go through some education with you on how to advertise the price of your property. And there's lots of different options that, different avenues, I guess, that you could take. So sometimes there is a listing price, and it takes away all the guessing. So that way, I guess they can just scope a load of people out that wouldn't even be in that ballpark.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is great, because then you've got less time waste, if you like.
Yeah.
The other one is price on application. So this may spark a little bit more interest as it gets the property out to a broader market than what it would if you kind of scoped out a lot of the other potential buyers by listing a price. So ask your agent how much either side of that price that you're chasing, and they will list it online. So, for example, for a $400,000 property, they might list it between $350 to $450, so that it comes up in the searches in the background.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense then. So that if I'm somebody who thinks I want to spend $350, but maybe I could negotiate upwards, it's still going to come up if I want a $400,000 sale.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And it's you open up to a broader market, but then you also go and, there is people that only want to pay this much, but they will move up. So you're still capturing those types of people in that strategy. And then another advertisement of price might be offers above XYZ amount. So this is quite similar to price on application, but it also removes those buyers that are clearly not in the position to buy the house.
Yeah, okay. So if they come in undervalued at that, it definitely says, okay, there's a hard figure there, and if I can't meet that figure, I'm not going to be the right applicant.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I wonder how many people see that and still go, I'm going to give it a shot.
And that's a good point too, because it's about knowing the market, right? There are different times that based on demand and supply, because property is all demand and supply driven, that it might be, they talk about it's a buyer's market or it's a seller's market. So in a buyer's market, I might be able to haggle more on that pricing because there's just not as much demand. There's not as many people coming through the door. If it's a seller's market, I need to know explicitly what my number is, because if I can't meet them there, they're not going to be interested. So knowing that information, again, from your real estate agent is going to be very helpful. And then both for the buyer and the seller, knowing what your real price is.
Yes.
We all need to be realistic, and this is where the reality sets in, and thinking about that pricing that you need, not just in gross terms but in net terms, because we do need to consider some of the costs. Buying and selling property can be an expensive thing to do. There's costs to get the house ready to sell. There's commissions, there's marketing, there's capital gains if it's not your home, it's been for investment purposes, conveyancing costs, mortgage and transfer and release fees, and all those other sneaky little costs that might be in there.
Let's not forget stamp duty. That's a big one.
Stamp duty, yeah, that's definitely a big one. All those transaction expenses, they can really add up. So you need to understand what those costs would be, and just put some rough figures to them, so that then if what your ideal is for your upper or your lower thresholds, in terms of this is the maximum and this is the minimum that I'm going to have in terms of costings there. Once you more clearly know that price, then you can actually stick to it when the agent brings you an offer, or you take an offer to an agent.
Yeah, and then you're not stretching yourself too much, all factors considered. And it's not just those upfront costs though, is it, Teneale? Because, for the buyer, when you're buying a new home, understand that the cost of the property are likely going to be different to the current costs. So it's really important to do your research and understand, you have to factor that into your budget, not just the loan repayments that you'll be taking on. So, how much is the water? How much is the rates? How much is the insurance cost, depending on, what location you're in? These are really big factors to consider. So don't forget, if you are buying a house, there may be rebates too that can reduce some of these costs. So if the property has solar panels, fitted, are you going to get a bit of a reduction in your fees? So if you've got an uptick in your water costs, for instance, or insurances, does that level out? So understanding all of those things on an ongoing basis.
Definitely. And I think the agent can be very helpful there and kind of give you that information about things like rates. So if you're looking to buy or sell a house, giving the agent the rates so they can pass it on to the other party can be really helpful. So I think that's probably a bit of a wrap for today's session around buying and selling property. Again, we're not specialists in this area. We've had a little bit of experience with our own property and certainly with clients in terms of questions around things like cash flow management and whatnot. But if you do have any more queries around this, we definitely want to hear from you. So we'd love to hear your experiences. Have you bought or sold a house and had to deal with any of the topics that we've discussed today? Feel free to put us in some comments. We'd love to hear real life accounts.
And if you have liked today's episode, please don't forget to follow us and share with your friends and family or anyone that you know that could benefit from listening. We also really value that feedback, as Teneale is saying, so do get in touch with us. Tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like or what you want to hear more of. And we'll see you again next time on Wealth Experience.
The opinions of the presenters are objectively ascertainable and are not intended to be financial product or personal advice.